Hello again. This is Chad Everett Brochures, and I am the host of Growing Up in the Wilds of Suburbia, and also the author of the Human Manual, which is a group of books that you will have the opportunity to buy in the very near future. Today, I'm going to actually cover a program that I'm developing. Actually, it's slated to be released November 1st. So, this particular program is it's called mastering the context of your mind, and the purpose of this is that we all have a context that we live inside of. Most people are completely unaware of this. The real specific and simple introduction to this idea or this viewpoint is simple. Consider that a goldfish swimming in a fishbowl has a context of life based off of the parameters of the fishbowl. The fishbowl is the context that sets the limitations and parameters to that goldfish's abilities, as well as its mental capacity. Now, if that goldfish has the opportunity to explore and experience things outside of that small bowl, say you get a larger bowl and put a few more fish into it, the context changes. I hope that's at least a beneficial introduction to it. Today's conversation will be dominantly based inside of a presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that bad boy up here real quick and get started on it. By the way, as always, if you have any feedback or comments or anything, please place it in the comment section below this video, and or share this video as often as you like on social media and or with friends. So with that, let's go ahead and just get this bad boy started. All right. Now what we want to do is get this to pop up. Give me a moment here while I set this presentation. All right. I'm just playing with this for a second here, so please that's what I want. Okay. All right, now we got lost into the dimensional portal. That's not going to work. Again, here we go. Into my docs. There's the coursework. And close that. Here we go. Bear with me as I am getting this thing to present. There we go. All right. Now with this, I'm going to share my screen with you guys. And this is what I want you to see. Okay, I'm holding that screen in place there. Okay. All right. The actual course is up in the top right-hand corner on Facebook, or on my in the chat column for those watching live. Okay. So the basic simplicity of this, before this thing actually gets all the way up and running, is if you tell yourself specific things that you can or cannot do, these are the things that you need to focus on, or that will be most beneficial for you to focus on. Meaning that give it a moment here. I'm actually having to read something. So again, with the bear with it moment. Okay. Okay. Like my little sing-along. All right. Gonna try that again. There we go. That's going to be the one I wanted. That's what I want right there. All right, ladies and gentlemen. This course should be, the introduction should be right there in front of your face. So the context of your mind. I use the brain as an analogy on this simply for the fact that the brain itself, there's a conversation, a doctor of mine, a doctor friend of mine, Dr. Frank Murphy out of Texas, it introduced me to the understanding that the human brain is the thoughts come first and the chemical reactions come second, just like the chemical or the impulses in the visceral system and how they communicate with the body. First comes the impulse, then the body creates the secondary aspect, which is actually the primary effect, meaning that like your gallbladder secretes, the bile juices and things that'll help digest foods and things, as well as your mouth secretes saliva, but that's after the thought. By the way, if you want an interesting example of this is when you're really hungry the next time and you smell something just delicious, pay attention to your mouth for a moment and see if your mouth feels like it's actually salivating. And if it is salivating, there you go, right? Why did that happen? Why did it start? You don't even have to actually, like, think about when you watch television. There's no smell influences coming out of the television tube at this point in science, right? But what can happen is you'll see a food that's extremely appetizing, which is a great job on the marketing campaign side of things to get you to salivate, but you've had this experience, I assure you. I know I've had this experience many times. Why does that happen? First, it's the thought comes into play, the brain creates the actual follow-through activations, and then you salivate, which is a preparation for digestion. So with that being stated, this gives you a better understanding of the placement of the mind to the brain. It's a thought process that occurs first, then the chemical reaction in the brain and second, and then following that with the reactions in the human body. So the brain itself is an organ like any other in that respect. So now it's a matter of how do we create a context that actually functionally benefits you? And most people have parameters and restrictions on themselves. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get back to that page. I have to shift this. So give me a moment. I dropped the wrong main page. There we go. So we're going to scoot into the next page here, which is success is your choice, and how I'm actually going to explain success being your choice is success itself is a concept. Let me make sure that I've got this, that it is reflecting on the main screen, what I'm looking at, which it is. Perfect. Okay, good. I won't go back to the main screen now. That is not the page that I wanted. Keep holding for a moment, please. Apologize about that. That was not the idea. Not sure why it came back out of this, but I'll just start it up again. Okay. So again, with the context of your mind, success is your choice. Now, how this is your choice is first you have to understand that the things that you've heard from other people and of which they have actually held as a truth for you has been a idea, their own limitations they put onto you. So with what that means is if somebody else feels that they can't do something, they'll have tried it in so many different ways, and maybe just one way. It doesn't necessarily mean they've tried it every way possible to try it, but it does mean that they've given some thought to the idea, whether they have any defensive tools against non-accomplishment, meaning like they have a skill set in order to get curious about the objective, the idea, the event that they want to achieve, and they actually did not do any research in order to find out how to achieve that. People have a habit of enrolling others in anything and everything in their life. Now, people don't commonly enroll others in how to be successful directly as effectively as they enroll people in how to not be successful. Meaning, I've tried that, you're gonna fail kind of thing. People love that stuff. I've done it to people in my past as well, not knowing and being unconscious in my actions. Now, as far as being a conscious, responsible person, it's to get curious about what you've tried and what you haven't tried. And also understand that as you mature, you develop out of the same skill set from before. Those skill sets that you have developed in the past actually start becoming more proficient and mature in themselves. Meaning that you actually start learning new parameters to each one of the areas that you tried in the past. As it continues to mature, fail and process or success rates start shifting the way you view that. So if you view something as a child, let's say it's mathematics, and you view it as a child when you're learning mathematics, math doesn't change at any point in time. It's a really consistent formula we use in deciphering physics in our occurring reality. Now, what that means is, as a child, you'll learn math through the idea of just learning it. Then you'll learn math as you get older and you become more mature, meaning you get a job, you have to pay bills, you start planning your future. If you're very mature, then you start actually planning out your future how you would like for it to be, with the understanding things change. Now, that's a higher maturity level most people don't really give themselves privilege to. But what they do give themselves privilege to is the development of different types of skill sets, but with the limitations of those skill sets by what they've experienced in their past. I hope that I am not speaking too quickly, but I'm extremely passionate about this subject, as I am passionate about learning and knowledge and applicable knowledge. So if somebody tells you that you cannot do something, understand, oh, by the way, to complete that is make sure that I really completed my example as a child to an adult, as you get to be an adult and then you start paying bills, and then math becomes functional rather than memorization. So as it becomes functional, you start to create a new perspective and appreciation for that particular skill set that you learned at a younger age when it wasn't as applicable. Now, when you're told that you have to learn something, but you don't have functional applicability to that knowledge that you're learning at the time, the question naturally comes into play is, why should I learn this? And then there's all kinds of things that can come out of that, which is conspiracies and all kinds of other nonsensical aspects, or even truthful factors. I don't want to focus on that in this video. But what I do want to focus on is applicability to your knowledge. So as knowledge becomes more applicable, it becomes more functional. And the more functional it becomes, the more appreciated it becomes. Now, most people have non-applicable knowledge. They have minimized applicable knowledge enough to have them survive but not thrive. Most people are not thriving. They're simply surviving. Paycheck to paycheck, relationship to relationship, heartache to heartache. You name the situation, and they have a propensity for being a victim or the survivor mindset, which is not always a victim. There's other facets to the idea, the context of being a survivor. Surviving is one thing, thriving is another. Oh, so the context of surviving is minimally making it, but yet thriving is maximally making it, or increasing the likelihood of making it with proficiency, and also excess in order to sustain yourself during hard times if hard times were to reoccur. So there's a functional knowledge and a factor with that. Most people that give advice that is considered negative, or the crabs in a bucket versus an ant or ants in a bucket. Let me elaborate on that. Some people may not actually understand that analogy. There's actually there's a story, or there's an example of crabs in a bucket versus ants in a bucket. Crabs in a bucket they'll utilize each other, like standing on one another, in order to try to get out of the bucket. Once one starts actually making success in getting out of the bucket, the others will start latching onto that one and pull it back in. Now, ants, on the other hand, whenever they latch onto the sides and they build a little ladder, they actually use one another to achieve getting out of the bucket, and they're very successful at it. Crabs, on the other hand, actually can stay in the bucket with very few actually ever escaping it. That's a context of mind and human beings. It's a choice in order to perceive your reality and validate the reality you wish to actually perceive. Now, to add more substance to this, I like to ask the question when personally mentoring, developing my students, is how many realities are on this planet? Now, to be fair with this question, I also like to add in that there is one absolute reality, one that everyone, whenever affected by that particular reality, will have an effect. So let's say gravity itself is a very, very close absolute value or reality. Now, it's not an absolute complete reality due to the abilities of man technology and certain voids of the like space and things like that. There is different laws that govern gravity. Like gravity itself is still a theory, so that's for all the people that try to chastise science for using terminologies like theories. They don't understand what theory actually means. It's not a verbal theory in the layperson society. It's a very well formulated series of facts that explain, or the explanation to these series of facts and the predictability of those facts leading to more facts, in which it continues to solidify its theory. That's what a scientific theory is, versus the layperson theory, which is I just think this, which is truly what it is it's more of it's a hypothesis without born factual testable measurements. So with that, again, this is all valuable in the context of mind and your success being your choice. Now, the accepted viewpoint you harbor creates the borders you restrict yourself by and the privileges you accept as being possible. Now, if you know that you have the genetic capacity, which will be the next page, so we'll go ahead and move on to that. Now, this is a interesting factor as well, because these are things that obviously have value in this conversation. Now, let's add this upbringing, which is your nurture, right? Now, this is where people influence you, and your nurture is in and out of the home developmental influences, meaning that your parents are beginning factors of authority. So as a baby, you identify them as being your sole ability to survive without the cognitive reasoning of being able to replace them, or being able to replace the resources they provide you to survive. That's a nurture factor for the first authorities. Now, your secondary authorities are the other people that interact with your parents that offer a degree of guidance to your parents, whether it's guiding them in thought or their suggestions against the thoughts that your parents have, and how that can actually offer a shift in your their parents' context, so that they will follow a trail of conversation that may lead them to another conclusion beyond their own, and they give the privilege to the person speaking as having some degree of authority to them. Therefore, you identify them as a secondary level of authority, and in some cases, a superior form of authority, like police to your parents. If your parents actually show respect for the law, then you see an authority above your immediate authorities. All right, so this is a key factor for religion, but I'm not going to belabor you in my viewpoints on religion at this point. So the next factor is, now this continues to breed out, but it is limited, because you do not have all of the world's influences unless your early authorities, your parents, or your guardians have a direct effect on a mass population, where if they speak something, then that person's words are heard by others, and you start to see them as a superseding authority versus the outside influences like an officer over that person. Because if they're in a position of politics or Congress or anything of that nature, they may actually be able to speak in such an authoritative level that when they speak to cops, the context is different for your viewpoint, because you actually see your parents in a position that can manipulate a position on a respected authority in our society. So this is all observed in the character and the actions of our first stated authorities. Now, moving on, and then there's the secondaries, as I've mentioned. Now, early authorities, again, being family, parents, parents, family members, close members of the family, friends, and then moving beyond that. This is also found inside of community maturity, of which I am writing that particular chapter in to all of the human manuals following editions. So with that, there's the compound exposure. So as you experience something, as you tell yourself it's a reality or a truth, at whatever age you do it, you start to look for the patterns that created that truth, whether desirable or undesirable, in order to back up that idea. So as you continue to back up that idea, you're compounding exposure, meaning that, again, you say, okay, well, touching the stove whenever it's lukewarm is okay, but if it gets to 120 degrees, it starts to get a little more uncomfortable. At 150, that's compounding the exposure. The first exposure said it's really not a bad thing to touch a stove while it's cold, but you don't know any variance against that. So you know that stoves can be cold, but we take away the can be as a child first experiencing a stove, and it understands that the stove is cold until the variances on temperature start to increase, which stoves rarely ever decrease after the ambient temperatures, or the actual climatal exposure temperatures, which is ambient. So the stove continues to increase in temperature. As that happens, the child actually starts learning that there's new factors available. That's where they put the stove can be cold rather than the stove is cold. I hope that that example exposes a little bit more of compounding exposure, or the compound exposures of experiences. Your first relationship was almost certainly one that didn't end well. Most people have experiences where some of their relationships haven't ended well. If you enter into every relationship moving forward and the context is that relationships don't end well, you are very likely to believe that all relationships are on that same path. Now, that's your hypothesis. It's not a theory that's actual factual against other people's viewpoints and experiences, but it becomes a related theory for you, or a relatable theory for you that is your reality. Now, that doesn't mean it's everyone's, but other people have similar experiences because we enter into the dating world in a very immature fashion. Very few people enter into a dating world fully mature and capable of resolving all conflicts that occur. That takes work, that takes development. So again, compound exposure, this goes for everything. As you start learning math, the compound exposures of math goes from simplicity, addition, to subtraction, to multiplication, and then divisions, and we continue up that ladder. That's all compound exposure in the same context of what I intend to impart with this. Now, as prior exposures reinforced by later experiences. This happens in every aspect of our life. The same reason, now there's other factors, right? If you feel that you have an entitled life, which is a lot of the present generation, or the present younger generation, there's a great propensity for believing that life should have a title factor. So you should be entitled to certain things and not have to necessarily work for it, because you're raised with the idea that you're special to some degree over other people, because the only way to be special is to have the context that you're special, which means that there is someone who is not special, so that you have a special privilege. Now, that is special on top of special, right? So there's a lot of conflict that happens. Now, in the functional world, whenever these things occur, people like to take things personally and make up stories about why they're actually not getting what they want. They play a victim mindset commonly. Again, that's a very common default for people and their contextual belief system. Now, if they have that context, what happens is another functional exercise I can give you is an observation exercise, where if you've been in the corporate world and you wanted a promotion and you did a lot of things that you felt would be promotable, but someone else got the job and you didn't. Now, commonly people say that that person either plays a better political game than you, or meaning that they say the right things and avoid the wrong things, and they continue that process until they gain enough favor and or clout, which is favor in thought and actions by others. Then you'll end up thinking to yourself that it was almost a borderline miniature or micro conspiracy against you because the other person was liked better than you. But truth be told, most of the time, people do not audit their own actions to find out if they truly were the better candidate for the promotion. So they spend a great deal of time outside of actually doing what's necessary to become the best candidate. Now, whenever you're not the best candidate, one of the things that happens, again, with the making excuses for why it didn't happen, is you reinforce how to make excuses rather than reinforce or create new ways of finding solutions. You find that an excuse becomes a solution by collapsing the concept. So other people will say, well, what did you come to as a conclusion in this? Well, then you have that conclusion, which is an excuse against what happened. Now, aside from that, there's other variables. There's a great deal of variables. This is only an intention to introduce. So moving on, the compound exposures, I can actually do probably an entire day's lectures worth on compound exposures to give you more of a functional reality, to basically give you the introduction to my theory, again, the scientific perspective of theory, which is multiple facts leading up to the story of why it happens, which is the theory of why something occurs. Like evolution and gravity and so many others. The law of lift is still a theory, but it's a law of physics as well. All right, so then we have infectious beliefs. Now, these infectious beliefs are based off of compound exposure or experiences that other people have had by their defaults and their how they have not triumphed over their desired intentions of achievement. So if somebody wants to become wealthy and they keep trying these very specific types that have been spoon-fed to them, like either get the college degree and you go off to college and you find out that your MBA gets you an accounting job where you make six figures, but low in six figures, while somebody else is profiting greatly off of your laborious intentions. And you have your student debts to pay off, so you don't really get to enjoy that six figures for the first possibly 10 years, depending on how aggressive you are about paying off your debt. So if you get a master's in business, that's a possibility that you'll achieve that, meaning that you'll get a job that you really didn't want, but you have to kind of settle for because it's what is available for you. Now, and I know a great deal of people with MBAs, and they suffer very similar fates to what I just illustrated. Now, the infectious beliefs can be something very simple as well, which is, you know what, I've had a lot of experiences in relationships, and those experiences and relationships have ended in such a way that I can foresee that your relationships will end the same way. I see that your friend or your boyfriend or girlfriend is behaving this certain way. That's exactly how one of my exes actually behaved as well. Later on, I found out my ex was cheating on me, or my ex took all this money, or my ex created X factor for pain in my life. And I foresee that happening with you. Now, the enrollment factor, which I actually wrote a very nice article on the irrational positions of modern relationships, irrational expectations of modern relationships, I'm sorry. But we'll have this infectious belief system that we actually fall victim to just the same as easily as we do fall victim to the flu or any sort of cold when you're not immune to that particular thing. Now, how you become immune to infectious beliefs is you actually start auditing yourself for what you find is true or not. And you hear something from somebody else and you ask the question, is it true? It may be true that they've experienced it that way, but is it true that that's an ultimate reality? And almost certainly it never is. So if you find yourself stuck in the idea that it is an ultimate reality, that's where you put in the is it true questions. And I actually have that in a few more later slides. So infectious beliefs is something to be aware of and develop your common immunity. If you wish to give yourself a vaccine of it, just consider that there's a couple of books to read and there's some experiences that you've had that actually will give you the audit ability to find out whether it's true or not. Always question everything. Is it true? The same as I'm giving you this conversation now. Is it true? If it finds that it resonates for you, explore it, create more depth to the thoughts and the concepts that are actually coming to mind as I speak these words. Now, I'll move on to the next slide. Nature. Genetics, the genetic hand you were dealt by your bloodline. Now, if you do not have and I'll go right into the next part too, as well as those restrictions due to the abilities based from your genetics, top speed running, muscular predispositions, type 2 muscle fibers, predominance over type 1, types like that. Now, it's not as common to find type 2B muscle fiber predominances over type 1 in most people, as not a lot of people have the ability to be a bodybuilder with a fair amount of ease compared to other people that may have different body morph types that actually are not easy to develop muscle because of the fiber compositions of the body, because type 2 muscle fibers are prone to hypertrophy and very quick hypertrophy, but they lack the ability for endurance, and almost all candidates with type 2 high fiber predominance. Now, if that sounds kind of alien to you, understand that I first started my direction in holistic education and my developmental education as a personal trainer, then, basically evolved into a holistic personal trainer and moved on from that to current developmental interests in education. So I spent a good deal of time in understanding physiology and started to see very similar patterns occurring in all people, but the differences of actions and the way they treated their body led them to developing specific conditions, whether those conditions are desirable or undesirable, but yet it still led them to that, but not dismissing the factor of genetics. So when your body's under a heavy stress load, as an example, when your body's under extreme stress load, both psychological, physiological, limbic, digestive, you add in all kinds of stressors, recovery, all kinds of factors, musculoskeletal stressors. You go into these different factors, you increase your total stress load, which actually creates the gateway to whatever predisposition you're genetically prone to. Like some people are genetically prone to MS. Some people may be various different forms of cancer. This is an explanation to why Not every single person that has cancer in their genetic line that live to a long age actually develop cancer at any point in time in their life throughout their entire life. There are cases like that, the same as there's cases of people developing cancer just because of predispositions, genetic predispositions. Now, again, there's other variables at play. Just because you have that predisposition does not mean you're going to develop cancer. But what it does mean is that you're prone to it if your stress loads increase a specific level, which means your body has surpassed its ability to tolerate that stress load. And then it gives you every step of the way, your body gives you a signal to try to slow you down because you're headed the wrong path for good health. This can occur in people that are bodybuilders and marathon runners and Olympic athletes. But most of the time, what you find with Olympic athletes is because of the demand of their high involvement by their environment, meaning that they have a very strenuous body demand, that they actually are well regimented and maturely handled as far as ensuring they get the right foods for their body's needs, the right amount of rest, the right amount of recovery, the right amount of physiological and psychological stress mediators, meaning that they actually do have the ability to eliminate rather than manage these stressors. Now, that's obviously something for another time, but as I hope that created a greater depth of understanding nature genetic factors. Now, these do have the limitations, like some people cannot run a 3-minute mile and others have been able to. Now, the ones that actually have been able to have actually broke the 3-minute barrier simply because they actually understood that it was possible to be done. But not everyone can do it just because they understand it's possible to be done. It may not be even a conditioning factor, but just that you do not have the right muscle fiber types or the correct condition of your current body in order to achieve that. I hope that enlightens you a bit on the subject. I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide for time's sake as well, because I want to open the floor for questions and answers. Now, your context and restrictions, I have been speaking around this entire time, but if you think you can and you're thinking, let me restart that. If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right either way. Now, that's not the exact quote, and I'm not a big fan of quotes by all means, but for this purpose, it is true. You are right if you think you can and you think you can't. Now, if you think you can, you're more likely to start looking for the how to accomplish the I can. Now, if you think that you can't, you usually close the book and go watch football or whatever your preference is to distract you from trying to achieve your goals. Now, gaps or restrictions are knowledge gaps, respective of the few genetic restrictions, as I mentioned on the slide prior. Now, I hope that you understand what that means. Gaps or restrictions that you self-impose are knowledge gaps. You do not know enough necessarily to acquire being a billionaire or even a millionaire. If you're not currently a millionaire, but you feel like you have a good structure in order to accomplish being a millionaire, you still don't know enough to do it unless you are it. Does that make sense for you? Now, it does not demean the knowledge that you have, but understand that sometimes the only difference between you accomplishing your goal and not accomplishing your goal could simply be that you don't wake up at 7 a.m. or earlier in order to get your day started. That is not the exhaustive list of things that actually can be restricting you, but it can be something that simple. The same goes for anything. You may have a library just to impress people. If you have a library just to impress people, you're arrogant with knowledge. Now, if you have a library and you're intending to impress people, understand that you're creating a deflated idea of yourself in order to try to achieve some degree of acknowledgement so that others create value for you and your friendship, or for something in your system so that they find value in you in somehow. Now, if you do have that library, you are this person that I'm speaking to, your future lies inside of the pages of those books if you wish to have a fulfilled life, because one of the great things that authors can do is offer their life's experience, and we can live vicariously through them by the lessons that they provide within the sheets of what they've written on. Now, if that's the case at play, then it's simple to move forward, which means that start cracking those pages and realize that some of the things you've actually wished for may not actually be what you really wish to experience, but it's based off of a more immature viewpoint because someone else said the only quality to life is being wealthy or having a good relationship, and completely misled you on understanding all of the other beneficial values to life. Now, this creates a life fulfilled so that whenever you do consider doing a bucket list on your terminal days of life, then your bucket list may be very few and far between as far as actually finding something that's validatable to put on the sheet. Not because of the current restrictions that you've had, but because of the experiences that you've had, meaning that you've already accomplished most of your goals. Now, knowledge gaps are your restrictions. And that is pretty much the simplicity of it. By the way, experiences are knowledge. Knowledge is an expansive conversation and an understanding. It's not just what you can pick up in a book, but also what you get from your experiences, what you make proof positive, what you believe your realities may be. Things of that nature also create your knowledge. Now, moving on. Well, that is unfortunate that it just did that. See if I can get it here. Nope. Not sure why it did that, but bear with me while I go back into this. If you're just listening, I accidentally dropped my slide by clicking on the sidebar intending to scroll down. Okay, there it is. Context restrictions and privileges, identifying a context restriction. Now, identifying a context restriction is a self-assessment tool that I do teach all of my students and will be found in the course that will be available by November 1st, 2015 through my company, The Human Manual. So stay tuned through Growing Up in the Wilds of Suburbia. All right. Now, identifying context restrictions. Identifying a context restriction is a self-assessment tool. The key question to ask yourself when telling yourself you cannot do something is to ask, is it true? Now, the first question and fundamental question is to question it. Is it true? Is it true that I cannot do this? Or is it true that if I do this, I'm going to have this particular outcome, which is usually it won't be achievable to the degree that it's been described or the degree that I wish that it would. But is it true? Now, this is a great question. I ask myself this all of the time. Is it true? Okay, so whenever I come across something I feel that I know proof positive, I always audit it myself, asking that question. And I ask this question sometimes ad nauseam to other people that may witness it, but usually this is internal dialogue and not spoken aloud in a group. Because wouldn't that be interesting, riding a bus and hear somebody just say without ever any preparation or any follow through afterwards, saying out loud, is it true, to a thought they've had? Or even in a conversation, I actually do work this into conversations with people as they tell me what they can and cannot accomplish with their life. And I simply ask them, is it true? Now, then after following that, I ask the other questions, which is then ask yourself, what do I know about this? So what is it exactly that you know about this? Do you feel that you have the exhaustive understanding and knowledge base that's necessary to fully come to the conclusions that this is an absolute truth, that it is impossible for you to achieve or impossible to achieve the way that you've heard it to be achievable? Now, is that true? And what do I know about this? The next that I have tried, now next, what have I tried? That's the next question you ask yourself. What have I tried that actually is the ability to achieve this? Now, what could I try is another question, right? So you have to actually understand the context and linguistic values here. Now, if you ask yourself the question, what have I tried? You're asking yourself a past tense value of what you know that you have done. Now, what could I try actually creates another context to this, or another value system inside of that context, which is, what do I know that I haven't done yet? All right, so what is it? What I know that I have not actually acquired yet as far as knowledge is concerned, and many other variables. Now, but for all intents and purposes, we're focusing on the knowledge factor of this, which all other variables will be part of knowledge, but not necessarily easily described as just being knowledge solely. Now, what could I try? Now, there's another. Who have I asked? See, now most people do not spend the time actually asking other people how to accomplish something, but yet asking the opinion of other people whether the accomplishment is of value or not. There is a very distinct value system in this, which I am very grateful to a new acquaintance friend of mine, Danny, for actually creating this new perspective, or this entire this tool set perspective, or adding into my tool set with this perspective. Let's say that. Now, do I know anyone who may mentor me? Now, whenever you actually create or find a mentor, you're not getting a mentor for their opinion, but you're getting a mentor for their ability to accomplish specific things. So if that person is able to make a certain amount of money, they know how to make it their way. Now, you do not need to model yourself completely after them, but model yourself after the actions of what they've overcome, which means that if they can, what is a better idea? Saving this money or using it on a marketing campaign or whatever that may be, you're actually asking them, basically, with that series of viewpoints that I just suggested, is you ask the question, how much marketing have you done? Okay, what was the return value of your marketing? Do not ask the question of opinion, because what you do is you offer them your perspective of what you want to do, which is not necessarily what they have done. And they may not have the maturity level acquired enough to, in order to guide you through your question to the most success-filled answer. Meaning that if you ask them something and they're maybe a gardener and you're in lawn services, they're very similar, but they're not the same. And you may spend your time cutting grass and all the rest of this, but this gardener actually does a lot of planting things. They're very similar, and most people would say they're very almost the same, and some people may even argue that they are the same positions. But it doesn't mean that that person actually has the best way of telling you, in their opinion, how to accomplish something. But they do have functional knowledge in how to make themselves successful if you do, in fact, see the fruits of their labor being success, self-developed, not inherited. Meaning that somebody didn't just die and leave a trust fund and then they're successful, but they're a horrible gardener. You actually look at the fruit of their actions. You see their character's truth, not their resume. Sometimes their resumes line up with their character, but that's not as common as most people would like to believe. Now, that's for another time as well. So, who do you know to ask? Always ask the specific question. Don't ask their opinion. Okay, so start learning to actually start breaking this down. Your friends can be a wealth of knowledge. Everyone around you can be a wealth of knowledge, but you have to start learning how to ask, rather than stop going around recruiting opinions, because recruiting opinions change your own perspective. But asking questions can add value to your perspective and help you accomplish it. All right, we'll move on from there because there's a little bit more, and I want to find out if I have any questions and answers to hold to. Now, the conclusion of this, as this is simply an introduction to the perspective of context of mind, it is in no way an exhaustive course. That course will come later in November 1st, 2015. Apologize about the noise. How to use this information. Start identifying whether you self-impose restrictions and get curious about whether it is nature or nurture. Let me actually restate that. Okay, how to use this information. Start identifying where you self-impose restrictions and get curious about whether it is nature or nurture. Want more information on this course, Mastering Your Context of Mind? Leave comments or suggestions in the comment section below. Share on your social media if you found value. Thank you for watching. Now with that, if you're interested, you will find that there will be a lot more availability moving forward very soon, especially as of November 1st, 2015. There are multiple courses that will be available through the Human Manual, and also likely courses linked through Growing Up in the Wilds of Suburbia. All right. Thank you guys very much for paying attention to this. This is the contact information if you're looking to contact the Human Manual, which I am the author of the entire series of books that will be published in the very near future, starting off with very simplistic introductions and then getting a bit more complex as they move forward. So it's Chad Everett Brochures is obviously my name, the author and the host of Growing Up in the Wilds of Suburbia and also the Human Manual. There's chadbrochures@gmail.com. That's CHADBROSHEARS@gmail.com. There's Chad Brochures, one word, /Facebook.com if you wish to find me on Facebook. And then there's also Chad Brochures at Google+. Thank you guys very much for that. I'm going to end the sharing now and conclude the actual video after finding out if, in fact, there are any questions or anything whatsoever. So let me get to that. It's giving me a minute to get back into the conversation here, so allow me to get back. All right, here we are. So we've got one viewer, and thank you for viewing. We don't have any questions or questions to answer in the text or even the question or answer box. So I will. Yep, no questions. So with that, please, by all means, leave any feedback information at all that you wish to do. I had planned this to be a full hour, but I feel that I've covered quite a bit of information very quickly. And with that information being covered as quickly and effectively as I have done so, or at least intended to do so, I'm not going to belabor you with a whole lot more ramblings of a madman. So with that, thank you very much for being part of the show. Again, leave any feedback, share this as often as you like. You have my full permission to share it in its full context, not stripped down into some other ridiculous context as I've seen other people do to people for simply furthering their nonsensical belief systems or their agenda. So with that, thank you very much. It is Chad Everett Broshears, the host of Growing Up in the Wilds of Suburbia. Thank you again for watching, and I look forward to the next video. Enjoy.